Don't believe the hype of the negative media. Yes, sir.
HYPE. Don't believe it. Hello and welcome to the Don't Believe the Hype podcast. A very wise person once said, "Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind." And that is the intention of this podcast. Our goal is to empower you to change your mind, and in doing so, you can change your life. To do so, you must be willing to transform your life from the inside out, and that is the reason you should be tuned in to this podcast. So if you're ready to be educated, motivated, and inspired to live the life of your dreams, then sit back, relax, and take notes, because you are about to be energized with some high-octane insights and wisdom designed specifically for you. So don't believe the hype of the mainstream media. There has never been a better time to be alive than right now, and you have everything you need inside of you to create an extraordinary life. So now it's up to you to change the way you look at things, so the things you look at will change. Because when you do that, you will gain complete control over your life, and nothing will be impossible for you. So let's get started with the Don't Believe the Hype podcast with your host, Coach Michael Taylor.
Hello and welcome to the Don't Believe the Hype podcast, where the intention is to empower you to transform your life from the inside out. The key to your transformation lies in your willingness to change your mind, because by changing your mind, you can change your life. So remember what the good book says: be not conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And this is the goal of this program, to support you in renewing your mind. So today we're going to have a conversation about personal transformation. And I define transformation as the process through which a person transforms from who they thought they were to who they were born to be. Truth be told, most people aren't willing to be transformed, but since you're tuned into this podcast, I believe you're ready. So if you're ready, let's go. So joining me today is a man who I have the utmost respect and admiration for. He has been involved in the personal transformation business for more than 4 decades, and his work has touched the lives of millions of people around the globe. His name is Robert White, and he is a speaker, author, leadership trainer, and executive coach who specializes in integrating a heart-centered, results-oriented, and transformational leadership approach to being effective. He's also a good friend who was gracious enough to write the foreword for my latest book. So without further ado, let's welcome Robert to the show. Hello, Robert. How are you?
I'm great, Michael. I am looking out at the beautiful Rocky Mountains covered with snow, and so delighted to be with you.
It is my absolute pleasure to have you on the show. So we're going to talk about your companies and the things that you've done. But before we get started, let's jump into a few icebreaker questions. So first of all, tell us where you're from. And tell us a little bit about growing up during your high school years. What was that like?
Well, part of my story is I was born in a high school gym on the Ohio River in Ravenswood, West Virginia, just outside of Appalachia, or on the edge of Appalachia. Grew up in poverty and with a alcoholic father and a mom who should not have had children. You know, she was angry, she was violent. And from both of them, I learned lessons that serve me today. So, you know, the sad story is just a sad story. And in high school, I was the kid from the wrong side of the tracks wearing used clothing and all of that. And then I went to work in radio. So when I was 17, I had the highest rated radio show in the state of Wisconsin. We had moved to Green Bay, Wisconsin. And so I became instantly popular. I didn't know what to do with it. It didn't handle some underlying issues of low self-esteem. The worst grade that I got in high school, now remember, the highest rated radio show, the worst grade I got in high school was a C in speech. I could talk to a microphone. In a booth, I was fine. In front of 20 students, my fellow students, I fell apart. And some psychologists could have a field day with that, right? But that was my high school days. I was named out of 300 students, most likely to succeed. And now I spent the next 10 years proving them wrong, but I think they did see something in me that for a long time I didn't see in me.
Now, during those times, during your high school years, what were you dreaming about becoming when you grew up?
I wasn't, honestly. I was operating from a pretty powerful, what I now call a statement of purpose, which was, I'll never be poor again. I had lots of jobs before the radio job, which was, unheard of and unusual I started at 14 as a control engineer, the guy running the dials and switches. But I didn't dream about the future. I just knew I didn't want it to be like the past. And that kind of motivation I've learned later in my life, unfortunately, much later in my life, it can drive a tremendous amount of accomplishment. It's valid as a driver of accomplishment. What it does not include is joy and satisfaction. And people have asked me, how did that expression get into the subtitle of my book? And that's where it came from me realizing, at the time I realized it, I was living in a 15,000 square foot home on 76 acres outside of Aspen, Colorado, with my own jet. But I wasn't joyful, and I wasn't satisfied. And that's the time when I wrote the book. And
so we're gonna jump more into that in just a moment. So I want you to do some sentence completions for me real quick. Okay.
All
sentence
right.
completions. Number one, I really love to
watch professional basketball.
Okay. Favorite team?
Denver Nuggets. I'm a Colorado guy. They got their butts handled last night, but I love them.
All right. My superpower is?
I'm resilient.
Ooh, resilient.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I am proud of?
My children.
Okay. Life is?
To be lived from a contribution level of purpose.
One thing I would like to change about the world is?
I'd like people to be better critical thinkers.
Okay. If I had a magic wand, I would?
Well, if I was Miss America, the answer is peace on earth. But for now, it would be to have more people wake up to what is possible in their lives.
And last but not least, the future is?
Bright if you choose it.
Okay. So now I'd like to give you an opportunity to introduce yourself and your work to the audience. So tell us who you are and what you do.
Well, I'm an interruption, Michael. In a conversation with you and your listeners, I'm going to get right down to it. I mean, it's easy to say that I'm an author and speaker and all that stuff. What I am when I'm at my best is I'm an interruption. I interrupt patterns that aren't working for people, and hopefully I'm able to guide them into a new attitudes, new habits, new behaviors that serve their vision for their life, whatever that is. And as long as it's positive and life affirming, I'm in support of that. So the skills that I've developed over the years, whether in building a company or being in front of 300 people in a 4-day training, one that you're very familiar with, the best thing that I can do there is be an interruption. This goes as a different way to talk about it. It's not about being a nice guy. I like it if I'm a nice guy and if people think that about me. But what's more important for me is that they respect my role as an interruption in their life. Yeah. So that's what I'm up to, whether in coaching, training, in my family. And I recognize over the years I've had to accept that there are people that will not resonate with that. There are people that won't like that people will call me unkind. As recently as this morning, somebody said that I was being mean. And I don't like that. It doesn't feel good. I like approval just like everybody. But I also recognize that each of us, 7 billion of us, are put on earth. I believe God put us on earth with a unique purpose, and that it's taken me a long time and a long process to really take responsibility that I'm an interruption.
Now, what does a heart-centered, results-oriented, transformational leadership approach to being effective mean? What does that mean?
Well, it would take an experience and maybe 5 days and maybe a lifetime to answer your question, Michael. I just spent 5 years in China, and there are 800 companies right now in China that stole my stuff, that copied my training, that copied my marketing methods, that, they just stole it. Now, Chinese do not think like that. Honestly, they do not consider it theft. And so I worked with a lot of them because people jump into our business, think it's going to be easy, and then, 6 months later, they're in trouble. And one of the things that I noticed over that 5 years is that people would literally meet me, and they'd have a notebook in their hand and a pen in the other hand, and they would sit down and ask me about a question kind of like the one you just asked me, which is a little different because it's about how do I be successful in this business? Mm-hmm. And we had already established before they sat down that I had 5 minutes before I had to leave for the airport. They actually believe that you could answer that kind of question in 5 minutes. Now, Eckhart Tolle, wrote The Power of Now and a bunch of other really good books that are more spiritual in nature. Transformation came to him while sitting on a park bench in a park. And I believe him. I don't know him personally, but his books have so much integrity that if he says that's how it happened, I believe him. However, let's look at the life he led up until that moment on the park bench. He was learning. He was reading Michael's book. He was plugging himself into coaching, into training, into motivation, into self-realization, into meditation, into prayer. That park bench moment didn't just happen. He had been getting ready for it all of his life. Werner Erhard, the founder of EST, which is now called Landmark, and his story is that he was driving across the Golden Gate Bridge and his life transformed. Well, Werner's rigorously honest. So that's true. However, he had plugged himself into Mind Dynamics, the same program that I went through years ago. He read everything in terms of personal growth, spiritual growth, everything. So he got ready. I think that's the journey. It may happen for somebody. I think Ram Dass said, suddenly while eating an apple. That in the right moment, transformation can occur. The work that you're most familiar with and that I've done for most of my life is a structured way to do that, to speed up the process maybe, or accelerate what's already there. So I know I'm kind of ducking your question.
No, I got it. So I have come to believe that there are really only two things that'll cause a person to want to change or begin their transformational journey. One is pain, And the other is what I call divine discontent, which is simply an inner knowing, an inner feeling that something's just not right. So what triggered you to begin your transformational journey? Pain or discontent?
Pain. I was 25 years old and ended up in court for my divorce. And, I operated my life at that time really fearful that anybody would really know what was going on for me, about my self-doubt, my fear, but also my ambition, and that, I'll never be poor again. So in the state of Wisconsin at that time, it was not easy to get a divorce, heavily Catholic state, which influenced the laws. So you could easily get what's called a legal separation, which is a little bit like purgatory. It's like a waiting area where you suffered. To get a divorce, one of the parties needed to have violated the marriage laws, to put it a simple way. So my wife and I got married at 19, both of us way too young, way too immature, all of that. By 25, we totally agreed we should divorce. But we couldn't just do that in the state of Wisconsin. One of us had to be evil. So I decided I'll be the bad guy. And you have to have witnesses, and you have to prove it. So I'm sitting in court in my little cheap suit, the only one that I owned. And in court, you don't speak up. I mean, I've heard people do it recently on reality TV, but not in those days. You get thrown out if you said one word. And so I sat there, and my former wife's sister-in-law got up on the stand and started testifying about me. And while I was sitting there, I realized this is not the little no, the Japanese theater is called No. This is not a no play. She is telling the truth about what a jerk I have been. And I can't say a word. Now, you see that exercise mirrored in your LifeSpring advanced training, right? When you get feedback that you don't want to hear, but you really need to hear.
Yeah.
Well, I hadn't been through any trainings, but I was in court. I couldn't say a word, and this woman is speaking the truth. So the next person gets up and the same thing happens. The next person says the same thing happens. I want to die. So the divorce was granted. Everybody shakes hands. I walk out very alone. And at that time, they were building the interstate highway system in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I-94 went right by the courthouse, so they had to close one side of the courthouse, one entrance. I walked through. I have no consciousness of this, but I later figured it out. I walked through all kinds of yellow tape and barriers and everything to walk out the exit that was closed. And I looked out over Lake Michigan, middle of winter, and there was a giant mound of frozen dirt. And this sounds so hokey. Sounds like some goofy afternoon soap opera. I'm wearing this suit and wingtips. Remember the old-fashioned wingtips? It's cold. I do have a top coat on, but I walk up on this frozen mound of dirt to the top of it. I look out over the lake, and I said aloud, I promise that the next 5 years of my life are going to be different than the last 5 years. That hokey, goofy moment was transformational for me. I started having what I now know is called readiness, that willingness to look. So that when 2 years later, when my friend came to me and said, I went to this training in California and they're going to do it in Milwaukee now and you should go. And I said, no, yes. And it's a cliche all these years later, but after those 4 days, my life changed dramatically.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, it's amazing how the universe sets us up to, shall I say, wake us up in different ways. like yourself, my divorce was the catalyst for my transformation. It was my divorce that was that divine knock up on the head saying, you know, Mike, you need to do some things differently. So it was
Yes.
springboard, if you will, to get me to change, to transform. So now, as I look back in retrospect, I can honestly say, without question, that my divorce was actually the best thing that ever happened to me,
Yeah.
without question. So I
Right.
completely relate to your story. So let's talk a little bit about transformation and how that process began. So you're introduced to this program. Now, you talked about some of the things that you had gone through before the program. So you listened to the truth about how they saw you, perceived you, and some of the actions. And then you had this experience. You went to this thing and it shaped you. So tell us a little bit about the man after that experience. After you went through these trainings, what shifted?
Well, first I'll mention that between the divorce and the training, I bought Earl Nightingale's Lead the Field program. And I listened to it so much, I wore it out. I literally wore it out. You know, little 15-minute messages that I needed to hear, that I didn't hear growing up. Messages about, you might call right livelihood, about personal behavior and ethics and character, right? That I just hadn't heard. I just didn't know. So that was a preparation. When a lot of, you know, I have to tell my story to audiences of thousands, literally thousands, particularly graduates or people that are thinking about taking the training. First of all, I almost never tell the divorce story. I tell the story, I went to the training, my life changed, because I want them to go to the training and have their life change, right? But people will ask, well, was it change instantly? And the answer is no. Now, maybe that's not good selling for our programs, but it's the truth. But here's what happened. What I got in the training, even though they didn't talk about the subject at all, they just had us go through this process, you know, these experiences that opened me up and got me thinking in a really different way. You know, when I define transformation, it's gaining a new perspective that maybe you never thought of before. You live into something you never even imagined. So for me, I learned that I was a critical jerk, that my highly developed ability to do critical thinking was carried too far. Now, later I heard this expression that whatever your greatest strength, when carried too far, it can be your greatest weakness. And that certainly was happening with me. And so I'm driving people away by being a jerk. When I got out of the training, I didn't change being a jerk internally. So what happened was, it's when I would be a jerk, when I'd be unnecessarily critical or in the wrong setting, it was like I could see the words go out of my mouth and land on the other person like a missile.
Oh, wow.
And blow up the relationship. That was really valuable, right? I could see the effect I'm having on people in real time. That was step one. Step two was I started doing this. You know, it was like, I still had the thought. I almost verbalized it. I captured it before it got out. You know, that's very uncomfortable, by the way. But, and then secretly, I started getting a little bit proud of myself. And I start noticing, gee, people kind of like me. They're kind of attracted to me. As long as I don't blah, all over them, you know. So that's how it happened. Now, so what I had to learn was, and you know, this is in Viktor Frankl's great book, Search for Meaning. You know, he's the guy that survived the death camps. He's the guy with a number on his arm and wrote this marvelous book. There are very few people in the personal growth industry that have not read that book, I've learned. I mean, it's like, in a way, subtitle for the Bible, or something like that.
Yeah.
And he talks about responsibility. It's the space between something happening and how you choose to behave about that something happening. It's about honoring that space and realizing you have a choice. And that's what happened for me. I tripled my income the year after the training. I don't know what happened for you, but that's what happened for me. And, in the training, they don't talk about money at all. And I tripled my income because I started being a person that other people wanted to be around, including in my own company and in my family. And then the following year, it went up 10 times. So to the greatest degree possible, I'm still working every day to live the values that training helped unearth within me. Those values were already there, but I wasn't living them. And so I'm still in that process. I've done a lot of other work on myself, over time, but that was the beginning for me.
Now, as a result of that, you launched your own companies. Tell us about.
Well, there was an interim, which is that after I went through the Mind Dynamics training, I found, they encouraged me to enroll other people, and I did. And then I sold my little sales business. I became a sales consultant in New York City. I went from managing 30 people to managing 800. So I couldn't do one-on-one work with people. Started doing weekend seminars. And I started bringing the Mind Dynamics instructor in to talk with my team. And so I enrolled 400 people in the training. And now I didn't understand the training. I didn't know anybody. I didn't know anything about its history. I just knew it worked for me. And I also discovered that if people in my family or my friends, or more importantly at that time, my sales force, if they went through the training, they were more responsible, they were more focused, they were more aligned, they were more committed. My life became easier and our results went up. And I was being paid on a percentage of the increase. So life was good for Robert. And then the phone rang one day, and this British gentleman was on the phone named Alexander Everett, the founder of Mind Dynamics, the guy that wrote the program, the grandfather of this whole thing. And he said, I want to meet you, and I want to fly you to San Francisco first class. So I go, oh, I'll do that. I've never flown first class, and I've never been to California. Wait, that's not true. I've been there once. I won a sales contest and I went there once. So 10 days later, I was president of Mind Dynamics.
Wow. Because
they were doing great. They had a great product. Their business was not structured right. It wasn't being managed right. That was not Alexander's strength, So the first 2 years I worked on Mind Dynamics USA, and the last 2 years I ran around the world. We started 7 foreign companies promoting Mind Dynamics work around the world. So for a young guy, early 30s, it was like a miracle for me, an incredible experience. And then one of the 2 owners of Mind Dynamics died in a plane crash, and I ended up working for a probate judge, which was no fun, so I quit. And I launched a company called LifeSpring, which you know a lot about. And 6 months later, I woke up one morning and realized it was not working for me at all. And so I quit. I quit my own company.
Wow.
I sold my shares to other partners in the business. I was the only person that funded the company, and that was all of the money that I had in the world. And I sold the company for nothing down and forever to pay. And the old joke came true that it took them longer than forever to pay. But I was looking for a job. Now, the only country I said no to with Mind Dynamics was Japan. Those people from Japan called me every month for 3 years. please come, set up a program. We really want to do this. And the day after I left LifeSpring, they called and they said, we're changing our offer. Come for only 3 months and we'll pay you for 1 year. So this was not some noble effort of expressing my vision that all that stuff we teach now. It was Robert had a wife and kids and a mortgage and no job and no money. So I went. So I went to Japan for 3 months. I stayed 12 years. I created a company called ARC International. We eventually graduated over 700,000 people from these high impact trainings. LifeSpring went on to be hugely successful in the United States.
Now, where does John Hanley fit into the LifeSpring story?
When I was running my little sales organization, before I did the Mind Dynamics training, I hired John as a sales manager and got to know him and got to know his family. And then when I went off to New York with doing the consulting gig in New York City, he actually ran my company in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, until I sold it. And then he, when I went to Mind Dynamics, after about 6 months, I gave him a call and said, we need somebody with strong selling skills. And so I moved him from Milwaukee to San Rafael, California. And he became the national field director for Mind Dynamics, and then my vice president of sales.
Okay.
So and when I started LifeSpring, he and a guy named Randy Revelle, a really incredible Mind Dynamics guy, one of our regional vice presidents, great trainer. Randy and John went off together to do business, some kind of business training, which didn't work out for them. So about 3 months into LifeSpring, John joined LifeSpring. So, and then eventually he took over the company.
So with that being said, for the viewers, we're talking about LifeSpring, and LifeSpring for me was, without a doubt, the most transformational experience I'd ever had in my life. My story is, actually my true story is, my life was a complete mess. I'd gone through a divorce, bankruptcy, foreclosure, depression, and I was in a really bad space. And I saw a little advertisement in the USA Today newspaper. And it was a little 3-sentence something that said something to the effect of, are you ready to take your life on, or something? And it gave a little phone number. I called this number and I connected with Lisa Kalman.
Oh, wow.
Who I actually interviewed on the podcast last week. So I connected with Lisa Kalman. She invited me to a guest event. I go to this guest event, listen to the people sharing about what they had gotten out of this training. And I said, I don't know what it is, but I want to do it. So I did the training. It was a 3-day training. I did this training, and it gave me the awareness. It gave me the courage to walk away from a very comfortable corporate job to start my own company. Now, the first time I did the training, I just did what's called the basic training, which is the introductory program. And again, I was launching this company. The truth is, it gave me the courage to jump, but at the same time, there were still some issues that I was not willing to confront. So about a year later, my company had failed. I was still trying to put my life back together. And I remember this thing called LifeSpring. So I decided to redo the training. So I go in, I do the basic training. This time I was really open.
Yes.
It was really impactful. So I went through the basic, I went through the advanced, I went through the master's course. I went through this whole series of trainings. And without question, I am who I am today as a result of those trainings. Now, I've done a ton of work, lots of different things. Therapy, landmark form, you name it, I've probably done it. But LifeSpring, again, it was the training that really allowed me to transform from who I thought I was to who I was born to be.
Yes.
So I am absolutely indebted to the LifeSpring training. Therefore, Robert, thank you. And I guess that's where we have this connection. But we're talking about transformation, and that's kind of my story. But Robert, I want to kind of jump into this for the audience to clarify a couple of things about these types of trainings. One of the things is there's this misconception, and I remember back in the 80s, there was a big story on 60 Minutes or something, and they were saying that LifeSpring was a cult. And so a lot of people have this misconception. So I want you to clarify, clean up that misconception that these trainings could be defined as a cult.
Yeah. Well, they certainly can have aspects of cult behavior. And remember, a cult comes from culture. And we call it a cult when the norms and the behaviors coalesce, and then everybody buys into them seemingly without thought. If you look at LifeSpring or EST or Landmark, what they're attempting to do is not to get you thinking like them, but rather to get you thinking for yourself and claiming your own life. Now, when you get together in groups and they're playing some great emotional song and everybody's crying and everybody's hugging, it can look cult-like. And one of the lessons I've had to learn, because I've had these accusations, remember now I have, between LifeSpring and ARC and now Extraordinary People, I have 1,300,000 graduates. If I'm living accountability, well, I'm accountable for what people say about us and write about us, even when it's an absolute mistruth, a lie. And so what I have to take responsibility for are the behaviors that we create or allow that look like a cult to the person that really doesn't understand cults. But as you know from your own experience, you were never told how to behave. You were never told how to think. You're never told anything other than you're a child. Well, we don't use God, but I do. I don't do it in the training, but I'll do it right now. You're a child of God. You have a life that you were born to live. And until you're 4 or 5 years old, you're probably living that life you were born to live. And then the culture, our parents, our early teachers, and particularly the culture, begin to affect you and limit you and take you away from the life you were born to live. That's the most common journey. And you start thinking you're not enough, you're not educated enough, you're not smart enough, you're not disciplined enough, all the not enough stuff. And it takes you away from that. Programs like LifeSpring, and there are many others, hopefully come along at a time when you're ready to wake up to what is possible for you as a human being. The structure of the trainings, I don't know if you've ever really thought about this, Michael, with all the work you've done, you may have. If you look at all of the LifeSpring trainings, all of the ARC International trainings, they're all based in the same simple structure. That first of all, if you want the life that you were born to live, you have to learn to let go of the past. You have to complete the past. That if you're carrying any blame, shame, regret, guilt, or even your past success, that's a barrier to you living the life you were born to live. And the great teachers throughout history who have a more spiritual approach, it's about being present. And you cannot be present if you are carrying this bag of rocks on your back, from your past. So until you forgive yourself, until you love yourself, it's really hard to get where you need to go in your life and where you want to go. So what all of these programs do is give you an opportunity not to disappear your past, but rather to take the negative energy off of it, or to take any energy, including pride. If you go back, just read the Bible, there's an awful lot there about the risk of pride and ego, really. They don't use the word ego, but that's the game. So letting go, taking the negative energy off your past, or any part of the energy, including pride, that stops you from being fully present. And the second part is to learn to better tell the truth about current reality. Again, if you talk about that advanced training experience or my divorce experience, I got for the first time a clear picture of my current reality that I had been denying, avoiding, unconscious about, right? And that's done in the trainings where you don't get perfect right then, but you get an experience of yourself, of what happens when you are rigorously honest about yourself, about other people, about the world you've created. And then if you've done those two parts of completing your past and telling the truth about current reality, or what the Buddhists call developing a selfless regard for reality, getting the ego out of the way, or getting egomania out of the way, then you've created the space to choose your future. For it to actually be a choice. That is not what your parents wanted for you. It's not what the culture says that you're limited to. And you write about this very powerfully in your books, about how the culture and you're describing a reality that I'm not that familiar with, but the reality for Black men is often they are operating from beliefs about their future that are extremely limiting.
Yes. And
narrow, I would say. But if you do some work on completing your past, if you get better at just being real about what's in front of you and what you've created up until now, that creates a space for you to choose your future, independent of any belief you have about yourself, about the world, about discrimination, about how the game is rigged against you. I'm talking to the guy that's an expert about this, so I feel like an idiot.
No, but Robert, I want you to make a distinction real quickly, because we're talking about the trainings and how transformational they are. So make the distinction between experiential learning and didactical learning, because that's a powerful piece of the transformational process.
Look, there's a really intellectual approach to that I've had to learn in order to do the work that I do. But I've heard various versions of these stories, but it's this. There's a book, and I do not recommend the book. It's a terrible book, but it has a great title. The title is, You Don't Learn to Ride a Bicycle from a Book. You don't learn to ride a bicycle from a video, from a recorded program. You get on the bike. It's an experience. If you don't ride the bike for 10 years or 20 years, now we're talking about why you remember Life Springs so vividly, you can still get on the bike. You might stumble around a little bit, but you have a muscle memory about how to ride the bike that came from your experience. Now, at the time that you did it, maybe you had a coach, right? Somebody to kind of help you. Maybe you had training wheels. Maybe you fell, skinned your knee, cried, and got back on the bike. You had an experience that lasts you the rest of your life. That's experiential learning.
Yeah.
I mean, I know the history of it as an industry that
right.
goes back to the women going into the factories in World War II, because the guys were off fighting the war.
Right.
And that's where this industry started. I don't know if you're aware of that, but the Defense Department after the war realized that a miracle had happened. That in World War II, we fought two big wars simultaneously and won both of them in Europe and in the Pacific. And so, of course, the Defense Department is looking at how all of that happened. But when I look at it, I go, we won those wars for three reasons. First of all, the bravery of hundreds of thousands of men and some women who died. That's the number one reason we won. The willingness to go out there and put your life on the line to protect other people. Secondly, good leadership. Not always, but there were some amazing leadership stories in World War II on the American, Canadian, Australian side. And thirdly, we won with production, with manufacturing. We made more ships, more guns, more airplanes, more ammunition, more everything than anybody else. And so the men went off to war. Who did the production? It was women. And jobs that prior to World War II that required a 10-year apprenticeship, welding, riveting, things like that, they taught women the same thing in 90 days. So the Defense Department said, kind of, what the hell just happened? We created a miracle, but let's dig into that. Let's find out what we did so that we could repeat it. And they set up something called National Training Labs, and they started studying. And what they found out was that because they had to, they threw these women into the experience. No classrooms, how do you get this done? And National Training Labs eventually, thank goodness, it's one example, a good example of how government programs wander off into new territory, right? And they all do. And
that's a fascinating story.
Yeah, and out of that came the early human potential movement and Esalen and encounter groups and all kinds of stuff that led to our work.
Nice. Now, one of the most powerful lessons I learned from LightSpring was this. And I don't remember exactly how the trainer said it, but this is how I interpreted what he said. He says, we always make the best possible choice for ourselves in that moment based on our limited amount of understanding. And when he said that, I thought about it for a moment. I thought about all the choices I had made in my life. And I was like, I don't know if I get that or not. Was that really my best choice? And as a result of the training, I now see how that's, in my experience, absolutely true. So can you speak to that a little bit?
Well, the story that's often told in the training is the James Bond story. That you pretend that you're James Bond and all the bad guys are chasing you and all you've got is your tuxedo and no weapons, and they've got all kinds of weapons. And then you lead people through that story and point out that at every given moment of the story, you make the best choice. Spending any time blaming yourself, feeling guilty, staying confused, analyzing it, it's all just a waste of time and energy. Given the amount of information you have at the time, you always make the best choice at that time.
Yeah.
One of the burdens that come from some forms, particularly of Christianity and Judaism, is guilt. We're kind of encouraged to be guilty. Well, guilt comes from holding one standard and simultaneously violating it. That's the definition of guilt. And I've talked to a lot of guilty people in our trainings where they're paralyzed by guilt. They're carrying it as a giant burden. And I just make the point. There's only two ways to handle guilt. One is to not do the thing, and that's almost always, you don't have that choice. You've already done it. And the other is lower your standard. At that time. Now, today is a new time. Maybe you have a higher standard today, but don't judge yourself about a past decision, about a standard that you have today.
Yeah.
It's really destructive. I mean, it's absolutely toxic.
Yeah. So let's switch a little bit. So we're talking about trainings and the benefits of transformational trainings. One of the things that can really transform our lives are books. I love books.
I know.
There's this guy named Robert White, and he wrote this book called Living an Extraordinary Life, Unlocking Your Potential for Success, Joy, and Fulfillment. Now, this book should be on all bookshelves. I'm going to plug Robert's book because, number one, I love his trainings. I love his book. I love the guy. But I want to take just a couple of moments, Robert, and highlight a couple of things from the book. And you said in your book that the most common self-limiting belief in the world is, I am not enough. Can you expound on that, please?
Well, I'm delighted that you noticed that out of many chapters, because one of the pieces of feedback I get from people that read the book is, I love the book, and I was disappointed that the book is not about you, Robert. And which is a nice compliment, but and I point out the book is about the interaction between our material, our experience, and the people that come to our trainings. As you know, the book is a series of stories about them within this structure of awareness, responsibility, and communication. So the book's not about me. That chapter is actually about me. And it's not revealed in the book, as you know, but it is. It's about my journey, because I spent a large part of my life being not enough. And again, you can accomplish a lot still feeling that you're not enough. If you're driven enough, like in my case, by, I'm going to get rich and I've got to show everybody, it can happen. You do show everybody, and you do end up rich, but there's a lot missing from that, right? But I was not enough. I was the poor kid from the wrong side of the tracks. I was the failure in marriage. I was the guy that had one semester of the university and then nothing more. I had a whole series of not enough statements. And I think that's true for many, many people. And yeah. It's such a destructive belief system. I mean, I know where it came from in me. I graduated from a high school with 300 students. I was number 6. When I I had left home at 14, and my mother moved back to the South, back to the Ohio River. And she moved across the river from Ravenswood in Ohio. I called her to tell her I was number 6. I was proud of that. Guess what she said? Why weren't you number 1?
Oh, wow.
I mean, that's what I grew up with. I mean, my being critical didn't come out of the ether, I learned it from a master. There was nothing in the world that wasn't wrong to my mother, including me, including my ambition. So I lived with that for a long time. It took me a long time to get that, I got a lot of weaknesses. I got make a lot of mistakes, but I'm enough as a human being.
Yeah, because I really resonated with that story, because like yourself, I made an early commitment to myself that I was not going to be poor. And I know for most of my life, up until my trainings or before my trainings, I was driven by a sense of I'm unlovable, I'm not enough. Therefore, if I succeeded, it made me temporarily feel like I was enough.
Yeah, very good.
But that hole in my soul could never be filled by the accomplishments that I achieved.
Or by a woman.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's a whole different chapter. But I think the power in that statement, Robert, is for us to come to that understanding of self-love.
Yes.
Just getting to a place where we don't need titles, labels, positions, money, cars, stuff to be happy with ourselves. To just really be able to say, I'm enough with just me. I don't need anything else. And so that was one of the things I got out of the training, to be loved and accepted unconditionally by other participants in the group, to have the experience of being trusted and trusting people. It really helped me shift internally the ability to be loved and to love. It was such a profound experience that, again, it helped me see. First of all, it helped me recognize how I had been driven up to that point in my life with that feeling of not being enough.
Yes.
It really helped me see that I am enough.
Yes.
The way that I am. So I thought that was really powerful. And I really liked how you talked about that in the book. Another one of my favorite chapters in the book is you wrote called Being Right is a Life-Threatening Condition. There is so much power in that statement because as human beings, we have this insatiable need to be right. So talk a little bit about that.
Well, the one-liner from the training that some trainers have used is that you can be right or you can be successful and happy. That's the choice. But they're mutually exclusive because the automatic thing that comes when you're being right is the other person feels wrong. There's no avoiding that dynamic. If I'm being right in a relationship, it means you're wrong. That's just how people process it. And we play that I'm right game for lots of reasons. It's usually to protect image, protect ego. And it's the single most destructive thing in relationships by far. I heard a talk by this conservative commentator, Ben Shapiro, recently, where he was talking about his relationship with his wife. And he said that when she starts sharing something, sometimes he'll stop her and say, do you just want to be listened to, or are you looking for a solution? And he said he does that because anything else triggers his need to be right, which is destructive to the most important relationship in his life, you know? So that's why those kinds of exercises are in the training about being right, and to realize it feels so good, but so does the third shot of whiskey. It feels so good. There's a downside there, right? In terms of taking you away from being fully present, and that's what being right does. It shuts down relationship, shuts down communication because the other person feels wrong. And then when they're feeling wrong, depending on the person, quite a few of them go, no, I'm right. And that explains a whole lot about what's going on in the United States today.
Absolutely.
I mean, there's a lot of I'm right. No, you're wrong. I'm right.
Yeah. And that's where we need to have that shift. So speaking of that, I'm curious now, in your trainings, I'm sure you've experienced someone that at the beginning, and I remember a couple of people that I obviously won't mention, but that came in, they were so rigid in their beliefs about being right at the beginning.
Yeah.
And then by the end of the training, they're like a completely different person, and they kind of get it about, oh, I don't have to be right. And even if I am right, I don't have to make other people wrong.
Yes.
So from your experience, that transformational process of shifting our thinking from being rigidly right to being open to the possibility that we can be right and the other person doesn't necessarily have to be wrong. What's the lesson in that?
The big thing is just to realize it doesn't work. It doesn't work to move you toward the what you want to create in life, because everything we want to create happens in communication. And in those communications, you're going to have to attract support. If it's a business, you got to attract employees, you got to attract lenders, you got to attract or investors, you got to attract vendors that can really do the job for you. But if you're this kind of righteous jerk in how you're being with people, you're going to drive the ones that you really need away from you. Yeah. And but what it really all comes down to is it's self-protective. I'd rather be right than be happy. I'd rather be right than get the results I want. I'd rather be right than create the kind of relationship I want. It's an incredibly toxic. It creates a toxic environment because what it triggers in other people is either, oh, I'm wrong, or no, I'm right, you're wrong. Boy, there's a great start, right? So it's a very practical thing. I mean, you can talk about it in a really, you can talk about it from a psychological standpoint. You can talk about what it triggers. You can talk about it in a spiritual standpoint. But I'm neither a psychologist nor a spiritual teacher. I'm a spiritual student. And I'm practical. And what we did in those trainings all those years ago, and I've done for now 40 years, I now do one-on-one. And, you know, a question I often ask a coaching client after they make themselves right about something they're doing is I'll say, well, okay, maybe you're right. Is it producing the result that you say you want? And that's almost always followed with a long silence. You know?
Yeah.
I mean, I wanted to mention something, Michael. We're talking about the training and coaching. Transformation does not require training and coaching. It's just more efficient. You can be transformed in a divorce. Absolutely. You could be transformed in the birth of a child. You know, in that moment you first hold that baby. For many people have told me their whole life changed in that moment. Your objectives, your sense of responsibility for this little being, you can be transformed by a promotion that you did not expect, or by support from somebody that came out, you think it came out of nowhere. Mm. I'll make the argument you actually set that up. But, you can be transformed by a lot of different things. For most people, though, when those things happen, they need some support to better deepen and better understand that process and what's going on for them. Yeah. And I can tell you stories literally all day long about that. Yeah. That you need support.
Yeah, and it's a lifelong process. We're constantly transforming and evolving, I believe. So with that being said, Robert, as we wind down, I want to give you an opportunity to let people know how they can find you. If they're interested in your coaching or training, how can they find you?
Well, first of all, I think for many people, they're ready, and I'll tell you how to reach me. For other people, maybe they're not ready for that right now, but maybe they will be in the future, see the need or see the opportunity. So for me, I like to just connect. I just want to connect with people. So what I do to encourage that is, as you know, I have a weekly email that I've been sending for 12 years called An Extraordinary Minute with Robert White, where I do a quote from somebody and then I comment on it, but it's all designed to be read in 1 minute or less. It helps me stay in touch with people, and they can hit reply. I answer all my emails. At the same time, if you go onto my website, extraordinarypeople.com, and register for the e-zine, the weekly email, you'll also get a 28-page document that I've been working on for 30 years. And it's about what we call the 8 principles. And we've used them in our trainings for many years. It's not part of LifeSpring, but it is part of what I've done. And you get an opportunity to rate yourself where you are now and also on where you want to go, and to narrow down the field of all of the ideas that are swirling around us. And we're inundated with communication. This gives you an opportunity to take a look at what aspect of my life do I want to work on next. So and it's free. So, and you can share it with friends and relatives and colleagues and all that stuff. So it's extraordinarypeople.com. And
from there, they can get your newsletter and connect with you by email.
Yep. And, I'm on LinkedIn and Facebook and all that stuff. So reach out.
Hashtag Robert White, or how do?
I'm not using hashtags, but if you search for Robert White Extraordinary.
There you go. Okay.
You're gonna see a lot of YouTube videos and stuff about me.
All right. Well, I want you to close this session with a Robert White motivational minute. So share some closing thoughts and ideas about the conversation or whatever's on your heart right now.
For me, what's mostly in my heart is to recognize the drift, D-R-I-F-T, drift. Our culture is promoting a certain drift, a drift of around, particularly mirrored in social media, but about being approved of, about doing the right thing by somebody else's definition, about kind of wandering through life. And you used the term earlier about waking up. So my motivational piece is to wake up to the forces that are affecting you. And do they have your best interest in heart? And I'm going to say most of the time, they do not. That claiming your life, owning your life, that declaring your life and then having it come true. It's in your books. It's why I admire you on the professional side, is that you're a very consistent voice for creating your life, for choosing your life. And you're an example of what happens when you start doing that. And then you start attracting people like me into your life, because I admire that. I like that. I like being around people like that. So be aware that there are very large forces in our culture that are preventing you, from living the life you were born to live. And that acting against that takes some awareness, some clarity, some waking up. It takes taking responsibility for your life, not letting anybody else or anything else determine your future. And then finally, to get into communication about that. Read books, listen to programs, go to trainings, get a coach. Thank you, Michael. I'm very proud to have written the foreword for your book. I think that's so cool. And just being asked, I can't tell you how happy it made me. And it's wonderful to be in this conversation. We've been in a lot of conversations, actually, but this one was special. And thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Robert. So in closing, I want to share another lesson that I learned in LifeSpring. And Robert mentioned the drift, which again is sort of a metaphor for society. But what I learned in the LifeSpring training was, it is my responsibility to take a stand in the drift.
Yeah.
To actually go against the drift and become who I was born to be. And that's the whole intention of this podcast, to support, challenge, and inspire you to take a stand for your life, to make it extraordinary, because you do have within you the capacity to be, to do, to have anything you set your mind to. I'm absolutely convinced of that. But it's going to take some effort.
It's going to take some courage.
Your comfort zone and get out there and make it happen. So know that it is possible. So this has been another episode of Don't Believe the Hype. And remember, the future is brighter than you think. And it is my belief that there's never been a better time to be alive on the planet than right now. You simply have to make that choice. Take care. We'll see you next episode.
HYPE. Don't believe it.
Coach Michael Taylor. Irrepressible optimist with a passion for the impossible. Empowering people to transform their lives from the inside out.